and welcome to this session dealing with SPS controls on products entering the European Union. My name is Hazel Sheridan. It wasn't intended that I was going to give this presentation today. It was going to be given by my colleague Louise Byrne, who heads up our Brexit unit, our Brexit division. So I'm the head of our DAFM's Import Controls Operations division. And that's the division that will be looking after the DAFM-based SPS controls at Dublin, Rossall Airport, Dublin Airport, and we also look after Shannon Airport. Okay, so starting off with some of the key messages that it's very important to pick up in today's session. So the first key message that we have to transmit to people is that trade will change on January 1st, 2021. Things will be different. The import controls will apply regardless of whether a trade agreement is concluded with the UK or not. Those import controls have been in existence since the single market began, and basically they're there to control products coming into the single market to ensure that the products coming into the single market meet the requirements for products manufactured and placed on the market within the single market itself. So it's to ensure that there's a level playing field. They're also there to ensure that if we're trading with countries that might have different animal diseases or plant diseases or mightn't have the same level of food safety controls, that we can assure ourselves that the products coming in to this country and into the European Union will not have a negative effect on the health status of animals, plants in the European Union, and also that the products will be safe to consume. Unfortunately, these new requirements will result in delays and they will result in added costs. There's just no way around that, unfortunately. As I said, these are a fundamental part of the single market. They have to apply in this instance because if they didn't apply here, they would basically undermine the entire single market itself. So when we're looking at the issues, whilst we're focused on the border between the west part of the European Union, we have to remember there are borders on the east, there are borders on the south also. And when the Commission is looking at the single market, they're looking at the entirety of the single market. There are supports available to assist traders to prepare. I think some of those were covered in the previous presentation. What I'd ask you is to check out the Debbie webinar on these because there's much more information in relation to them. So there are supports provided by Enterprise Ireland. There are supports and information available through the Board-BIA series of webinars and various other sources as well. Our key message to everyone today is people need to act now. As we said, things will change, the import controls will apply, and it's therefore essential that businesses do what they need to do today to make sure that they're ready for the 1st of January. In terms of import controls, I've covered a little bit of this already. What are they? Why are they there? Where are they carried out? So as I said, they have two very important purposes. They're to make sure that there's a level playing field, that we're not introducing products that are being produced to a lower standard into the European Union, and we're also protecting the very high health status we have for animals and plants. And we're very dependent on that high animal health status and plant health status to trade with other parts of the world and with other European countries. And anything that threatens that status could have a very serious impact on our ability to trade with other countries. And as I said, we're a very export-dependent country, so we need to protect that by protecting and ensuring that what comes into Ireland meets the requirements of the European single market. The details of these controls are laid down in EU legislation. So obviously the EU is trying to ensure that the rules are applied in a harmonised way. So we don't have a lot of choice in relation to these rules. They are laid down at a European Union level in European legislation, particularly European regulations, and European regulations are directly implementable in the member states. So if there's a requirement for an operator or a business in the European regulation, that's directly implementable. The operators must comply with that. There is no choice. There's nothing we can do about that. It places a direct responsibility on the shoulders of the operator themselves. In terms of SBS products, and I should have explained SBS products for those of you who aren't familiar with it, SBS means sanitary and phytosanitary. So sanitary referring to health status of animals and plants, of animals and food safety of products, and phytosanitary then obviously refers to plant health. So products coming into the European Union that carry a risk of disease, they are subject to import controls. The majority of those import controls are carried out at premises called border control posts. Border control posts have to be approved by the European Union, and we have 3 border control posts currently approved, and Rosslare will become an approved border inspection post in time for January 1st. The other 3 are Shannon, Dublin Port and Dublin Airport. As I said, the majority of import controls are carried out at border control posts. There are some other types of controls that are carried out on imported goods that are carried out away from border control posts, and I might mention some of those later on. It's important when we're thinking about the types of products that are subject to control. So again, that's laid down very clearly in the legislation. So the types of products and commodities that are subject to controls are live animals, products of animal origin, germinal products, so that's semen, ova and embryos, animal byproducts, and for those of you who don't know what an animal byproduct is, it's basically a part of an animal that is not used for human consumption. So they might be used as organic fertilizers, they might be used to feed dogs or cats, those kind of things. They include hides, wool, all of the parts of the animal that are not consumed by humans. The other category of goods that are subject to import controls at border control posts would be plants, regulated plants and plant products. And again, the important thing is for each of you that is importing SBS products from the UK, it's to check, what category they fall into and are they required to be presented at the border control post for checks. Products of animal origin also include fishery products. So the requirements for fishery products are the same as they are for other products of animal origin, but there's also a very specific requirement for fishery products, and that is the requirement to have an IUU certificate. So this is a certificate attesting to where the fish have been collected, and as the slide says, they're to support the conservation of fish stocks. And IUU stands for Illegal, Unreported, and Unregulated Fishing Regulations. So those of you who'd be involved in bringing in fish and fishery products from the UK, the key question you need to ask is, are you going to be able to get the IUU certificate to accompany those products? Because it is required to accompany those products when they arrive at the border control post. In terms of controls on wild fish, these are allowed to be carried out at premises that are not border control posts. So that's what I'm saying. There are some controls that can be carried out at places other than border control posts. And they will be carried out at where the direct landings have taken place. So that's just to give you a flavour about the reasoning behind import controls. Where's the legislative basis? What does it mean? It means the majority must be presented at border control post. And just to point out that when we are talking about products of animal origin, we also are talking about fish. So when we use the term import controls, what are we talking about? So the types of import controls that are carried out, they're documentary checks, they're identity checks, and they're physical checks. So it's 3 layers of checks carried out. Documentary checks are carried out on all consignments that are required to be presented at border control post. Identity checks are carried out on all consignments of live animals, products of animal origin, germinal products, and animal byproducts. Not every regulated plant and plant product consignment has to be subject to an identity check. It is a percentage. So again, just to say that the types of checks can vary depending on the type of commodity. Physical checks, again, they're not carried out on every single consignment bar live animals. 100% of live animals must be subjected to a physical check. They vary depending on the type of commodity, and they're basically linked to the risk associated with that commodity. So things that might carry quite a high risk of disease transmission will be subject to higher levels of physical checks, and those that are those that have a lower risk will be subject to lower levels of physical checks. Again, that's probably not so important for yourselves. That's more important for us to figure out how we're going to ensure compliance with those requirements. But again, if you want to find out some general information about that, there is lots of sources that you can go to, from EU sources to the DAFN website that I'm going to give you the address of at the very end of the presentation. But this was just when we're talking about import controls, it was to give you a sense of the controls that will be carried out at the border control posts. This is a slide that possibly actually should have been a bit earlier in the presentation, but just to say, I think at this stage you're probably familiar with the way to submit questions is through slido.com, and the event code there is hash or 184, and we look forward to any questions that you would have, and I think you've already submitted some, which is absolutely great. Okay, so at this stage, we're less than 3 months away from controls applying to products from the UK. That is a certainty. They will be documentary, identity and physical checks. So what are the questions that you need to ask yourselves at this point in time? The first thing is, this is a very important concept, the operator responsible for the consignment. So the key question you have to ask yourselves is, if you're bringing products from the UK that require a check at a border control post, have you identified who this person is, this operator responsible for the consignment? This is a legal entity. There are responsibilities placed on that legal entity in the European legislation. And this really is the key entity for getting the products through the border control post. So who can this person be? They can be somebody in your own company. They can be so basically you can either do this activity within your own company, or you can outsource it to another company. We do have consignments obviously coming in to Ireland from other third countries at the moment, be it China, be it America, or a whole range of countries. In general, the operators responsible for the consignments tend to be customs agents, those that are completing the customs formalities. Because there are some, these are quite detailed requirements. They take a bit of familiarity to get it right, and they take a little bit of experience. So certainly this is a very important thing to identify this person at this particular point in time, so that that person can get familiar with what they need to do, with the various documents, with the various terminology, those kind of things. So on this slide you can see some of the responsibilities of the operator responsible for the consignment. The first thing is they will be the person responsible for completing what's called the Common Health Entry document. So again, that's a very important concept to get into your heads, because this is basically the core document that will allow the product that you're importing to enter the country and be placed on the single market. It's the job of the operator responsible for the consignment to complete that document. And there's quite a lot of detail on that document. So what we would urge people who are going to be as they're called, the RFCs, just that's short for the operator responsible for the consignment. We would urge people who are going to be RFCs to start to get familiar with the detail in the Common Health Entry document. And if they want to get in touch with us on our Brexit registration email address, we can help people with that particular part of the activity. Because we do have experience of people coming into this business for the first time, and it certainly takes a bit of time to get familiar with the terminology, what needs to go in what box, what problems people can have. So the sooner they start to register and to try out using the various documents, the better. It'll also be the responsibility of this individual to obtain copies of the various documents that are, to obtain the documents that need to travel with the consignments. So just to say in general, live animals, products of animal origin, germinal products, animal byproducts must be accompanied by a health certificate, and it has to be an original health certificate. Plant products, the rules are a little bit more relaxed. They do have to have a phytosanitary certificate. It doesn't always have to travel with a consignment. And again, if you want to contact us on the various addresses that I'm going to provide, we'll be able to provide that detail. So again, I think the key point for you to take away is that the requirements differ depending on the commodity. So it's really important that you get clear sight of the commodities you're bringing in, and you get clear sight of the requirements. So the operator responsible for the consignment will be the individual that will make sure that the documentation is there and travels with the consignment. Because consignments arriving at the border control post without documentation will not be allowed to be placed on the single market. So it's really important that work is done now. As I say, the documents can be commodity specific. So the key question businesses need to get an answer to at the moment is, in terms of the suppliers from the UK, are they going to be able to provide the certificates that are required for the particular commodity that's being brought in? And if you look at those certificates, they're quite specific things that have to be certified. So it's very important that if you're relying on a supplier in the UK, you have a guarantee that yes, the certificate is going to be able to be provided, and they will be able to certify everything that's on the certificate. So for example, the certificates can only be supplied, or they can only be signed at premises that are being authorised by the UK. And certainly back in 2019, there were arrangements where people were planning to do certification at premises that weren't approved by the UK. So it's very important that there is contact with the supplier, and the supplier can provide guarantees. Yes, the certificate can be provided. Here's the timescale in which it's going to be provided. It is in full compliance with the EU requirements. What else does the operator responsible for the consignment need to do? So there's a legal obligation in the European legislation that the operator responsible for the consignment must complete the common health entry document within at least 24 hours in advance of the consignment arriving at the border control post. That's very important that that's done at that time interval, because that enables us as the competent authority to carry out some preliminary checks. And in the case of consignments of plants and plant products, in some situations, those preliminary checks will be sufficient to enable the product to be placed on the European market. So it really is in people's interest to get documents in as soon as possible, so that the relevant checks can be carried out and there won't be delays to the products moving through the port. In addition to, just to try and explain, there's a European computer system. It's called the Traces system. Some people might be familiar with it. And the purpose of the Traces system is really to monitor what's coming into the European Union. So it's a legal obligation, as I said, to do a notification through the Traces system to say a load is on its way. That allows the competent authority to make plans to carry out the relevant checks. When the relevant checks are carried out, it is through the Traces system that the result of the check is notified, and then either the product is allowed to enter the single market or something else must happen with it. Side by side with the Traces system, to facilitate trade and to ensure that things move as quickly as possible, DAFM has built a separate computer system. At the moment it's called the APHID system, and I think it'll be changing its name in the future to the INIS system. Anyway, the name doesn't matter. The idea of that system is that it will enable people to submit the documentation in advance of the consignment arriving. And as I said, that's very important when we talk about plant and plant products, because that will enable us, in some cases, to authorise the consignments for placing on the single market before the consignments get to the port, and that means they won't have to stop at the port or the airport. Another important role of the operator responsible for the consignment, as things stand, we would have a lot of contact with these individuals, because they're the people you go to when there's a problem. So one of the advantages of submitting the documentation in advance is when we do a preliminary check on that and we can see some problems, we can then let the operator responsible for the consignment know. And in the event that that's an issue that is likely to mean that the consignment is not going to be released onto the single market, well then at least it gives businesses a chance to do something about it before they've actually sent the truck and the truck has boarded the ferry. So again, just emphasising how important it is to get documentation in advance, because really that can help to avoid a lot of problems. Because if consignments are turning up at the ports that don't meet the requirements of the legislation, we will have no choice but to follow the EU legislation in relation to those, and that is to reject them. And I'll talk a little bit about the consequences of rejection later on. So again, really, there's quite a bit of detail on this slide. The idea is really to understand what this concept is and how important this person is, and how it's really important that you identify who is going to be this person for your particular part of the business. Is it someone inside your company, or are you going to delegate that activity to an outside body? Just a few things to say about the haulage company and the drivers themselves. So obviously the key job of the driver will be to know what sort of check the consignment has been selected for, or the freight unit has been selected for, and to ensure that it's presented to the border control post. So I'm sure this has already been covered by the revenue presentation. But just to say, the basic principle is freight units on the ferries will be given one of 5 call signs, or whatever you want to call them. The first of those call signs will be they'll be notified that they're free to leave the port. So that might be because they're not an SBS product, so therefore they don't require a check at the border control post, or else it's a plant consignment. The check has been carried out and the product has been deemed fit to be placed on the single market. So that is exit the port. The next call sign that has been built into the revenue system is report to the live animal border control post. So just to say, at Dublin and Rosslare ports, the border control facilities are divided up into several different units. So in Dublin Port in particular, the live animal, the area where the live animal checks will be carried out, it's specific to live animals, because obviously there are welfare implications in handling live animals. The plan is that the freight units carrying live animals, and in the case of Dublin, that's mostly horses. In the case of Rosslare, that tends to be cattle, that they'll go straight to that live animal facility and have the checks carried out there. For the rest of the consignments that require SBS checks, again, depending on the assessment of the documentation that's submitted at least 24 hours in advance, a decision will be taken that either the consignment is due for just a documentary and a seal check, so we might call that a partial inspection, or they are selected for a full inspection. So a full inspection is a documentary identity check and also a physical check. So the way the port is set up, both ports are set up at the moment, is in the event that the consignment is selected for a partial inspection, it will go to certain facilities in what's termed the T7 checking facility. So again, really, rather than taking all the detail on board in this presentation, it's just to say, actually, depending on what's on the truck, it might get a call to do something specific. So again, if it's a consignment that's selected for a partial inspection, we have set up a sort of a lane system in T7 that the trucks will be able to drive straight into those lanes to have that partial inspection carried out. If that is a satisfactory, or if it's deemed to be in compliance with the requirements of the single market, the consignment will be then accepted and will be able to leave the border control post. In the event the consignment has been selected for a physical check, the driver will receive a message via the revenue system which will indicate that the driver needs to park up awaiting a call to go to the physical inspection. So if you want to think about what that's like, it's a bit like a hospital waiting room. You go into the waiting room, you wait there till you get called, and obviously getting called will depend on there being free space available to carry out that check. The final call sign is then in relation to transit, and that's a revenue activity at both the ports. It doesn't involve the SBS products to the same extent. So the key thing hauliers and drivers need to get a handle on is, okay, when my truck arrives at the port, where am I likely to be going? If I get a call to say that I need to call to customs, where will I be going? If I get a call to the live animal facility, where is that? So we would encourage haulage firms and drivers at this point in time to become familiar with where those facilities are located within the port. They will be signposted, but those of you who drive through Dublin Port will know that it is quite a complicated arrangement. So we would really advise people to get familiar with where they're going. Our experience today is very quickly the drivers get very familiar with where the facilities are and have very little difficulty getting to them. So again, just to make life easy, we would suggest that hauliers and drivers made themselves familiar with what those arrangements are. The other key responsibility of the driver will be to have the documentation with them. So that is making sure that the driver and the haulage company are very clear on what documentation must be with the consignment. As I've said, if it's a consignment of live animals, it will be required to have an original version of the health certificate with the consignment. If it's consignment of plant products, it'll be something slightly different. So again, they're commodity specific. It's very important people know. And again, our advice would be that there would be a check before the driver gets on the ferry that they have those documents with them. Because if they arrive at the Port of Dublin without the necessary documents, that is going to be a serious problem and result in the consignment being held and possibly being returned to the UK. Again, this next point is sort of emphasising that communication is absolutely essential. That the hauliers and drivers have very good communication with the operator responsible for the consignment, so that they can, they can just check things, they know what sort of inspections are going to be required, just that exchange of information. So again, it's really important to think, have we got that communication system today? And again, obviously, the operators responsible for the consignment need to have ways of contacting the drivers if something changes or, there's an update that needs to be prepared. So again, all of that needs to be thought of because, where that hasn't been worked out, all of those things can just add to delays. And really at this point in time, it's identifying what things are within your own control that you can, if you act now, they will help smooth the passage of these consignments through the various border control post facilities. So, summarising the points that we've made up to now, really, it's the key questions that you have to ask yourselves today is, have you selected the operator responsible for the consignments that will be coming to you? Have they contacted Brexit registration at agriculture.gov.ie to make sure that they are registered on the various systems? We won't get into the details of that, it's kind of complicated, but it's really important that those individuals contact Brexit registration. Even if they think they're already registered or whatever, it's certainly we would encourage people at this point in time when we're getting quite close to the jumping off time that people just verify they have all the necessary registration. So we're encouraging people to contact Brexit registration. As we said already, very important that the consignments have the right documentation with them. And again, that's not simple to sort out. So we would strongly encourage businesses to contact their suppliers and have very precise discussions about what certification is going to be required, when am I going to get it, what's going to happen if there's a problem with that certification, all of those kind of things. Will you be able to certify all of the elements? Because again, if there's something not entered on the health certificate, that's going to cause problems. And by the time it gets to the port, it will be the haulier's problem and the importer's problem, not necessarily the exporter's problem at that point in time. And that's why communication with those premises of origin is absolutely essential. Just another thing to think about at this point in time is how the freight will be presented, because that can have a very big impact on the efficiency of the checks being carried out. So I mentioned at an earlier point in time that there's a requirement to do identity checks. So identity checks are two types. Where there is a seal applied to the lorry by the competent authority in the UK, by an official in the UK, and that seal is entered on the health certificate, the identity check is a fairly straightforward check. It's just a check that the seal hasn't been broken and the seal number complies with the seal number on the certificate. So that we would envisage doing in the lanes in T7. However, if the truck is not sealed, that's a very different matter. And an identity check in that case could require us having to take all of the materials out of the container, because obviously the purpose of the identity check is to make sure that the product has not been substituted. So in a situation where there's no security over the truck and what's inside the truck, we may in that situation have to unload the entire truck to verify that the contents match the health certificate. That will not be able to be carried out in the fast lanes in T7. That will require the truck to park up and wait for an area to become available in our physical check facilities. Another thing that could have a very big impact on the efficiency with which consignments can go through the port is the number of consignments, the efficiency of trucks can go through the port is the number of consignments that are on that truck. And in particular, this is an issue for mixed loads, so that would be loads currently going to supermarkets, also applies to groupage, because the more consignments that are on the truck, the more health certificates that are required and the more common health entry documents that have to be completed. Because the EU rules say currently that there has to be a health certificate for each consignment and there has to be a shed for each consignment. So if you happen to have a truck that has 20 different consignments on it, that's 20 different sheds to be completed, that's 20 different health certificates to get. It is not possible to issue a single certificate for a truck of goods going to a supermarket. That'd be a question we had been asked a number of times early on when people are getting familiar with the requirements. The EU rules are clear on what constitutes a consignment. It has to be of one commodity type going to the same destination. Now, that's obviously a substantial challenge for businesses today. Again, our door is open in relation to issues surrounding that. There will be products crossing across the border, the single market, on January 1st that have never crossed the single market before. So that presents a challenge for us all. I mean, it's obviously a serious challenge for yourselves. It's a challenge for us as competent authorities. And it may be a challenge for the Commission as well in terms of the existing rules. So it's really important that we hear from yourselves today about any issues that you foresee. So if you're looking at sheds or you're looking at the EU rules and you're concerned you're not going to be able to comply with them, the important thing is that you would come to us at this point in time till we see what can be done or what advice can be provided. So again, the simpler the load, the more efficient it will be to process through the border control post. And again, we're happy to engage bilaterally with people in relation to this. In particular, we're really looking to hear from the operators responsible for the consignments because they are such key people in this process. So early on I said the import controls, they have three elements to them: documentary, identity and physical. At the end of the completion of those checks, then a decision is made in relation to the consignment, which is either to accept or reject the consignment. If the consignment is deemed to be in compliance with EU rules, what will happen is this common health entry document will be signed off by, in the case of products of animal origin, by an official veterinarian. In the case of products of plant origin, it will be signed off by a plant health inspector. The customs system will be notified through contact with the DAFM system, and the consignments will then be released from the BCP, and assuming they have met and complied with the customs formalities, at that stage customs will be in a position to greenlight them and let them leave the port and onto the premises of destination. Just again to give yourselves a little bit of background information, we're hoping that this won't be happening very often. So if the decision on the consignment is that it's not in compliance with EU rules or that it poses a hazard, the decision in that case will be rejection. And again, the EU legislation is crystal clear on what must happen in this situation. We as a member state have no discretion in relation to this. What happens if the decision is that the consignment hasn't met the EU rules is that it has been rejected, and there's only three options in that case: return to the country of origin, destruction. In limited cases, there may be a treatment it could undergo to minimise or reduce the risk, to remove the risk. So the key point of this slide is to say you need to think about that at this point in time. What will you do as a business operator if a consignment that you've ordered arrives at the port and it is deemed to be non-compliant? And what I would suggest is what needs to be done is have a conversation with the supplier in this case, because what you don't want to get into a situation is you're stuck with the consignment stuck in the port and there hasn't been a conversation with the supplier in relation to that. Because the issue will almost certainly have come from the supply end. So it's very important that there is a conversation with suppliers and a plan in place about what you're going to do if the worst happens. Just to give you an indication in terms of the consignments we deal with today, the majority of reasons for rejection are documentary errors. And documentary errors are not always minor things. They can be quite serious. And then a small percentage, 12%, are due to inconsistencies between the paperwork and the identity of the packages or the animals or whatever they are. And obviously, again, that's quite a serious thing because that could mean that substitution has taken place. So that's why, the action in that case is rejection or destruction or return to the country of origin. So again, we just wanted to give you a sense of what causes rejections to happen. We have no discretion in relation to it. Time to have a conversation with your suppliers as to what would happen in that particular case. And also in a situation where there might be more than one consignment on the freight unit, a decision has to be taken about, well, what's going to happen in that case? How are you going to deal with that situation? So if you have 9 compliant consignments and 1 non-compliant consignment, again, need to have a plan about that. And we're really happy to enter into discussions on that, particularly with the operators responsible for the consignment. Because again, just that they get familiar with the EU rules and that they can make a plan. Just a small point to mention, and I can see my speaking time is running out, which is interesting. So just to say, to bring your attention to the fact that there are regulations on wood packaging materials. And there's been quite a lot of discussion about this and people hoping that there'll be a derogation. There will be no derogation. These are single market rules. They have been in place for many years. And to provide a derogation here would undermine the single market in general. So it is a case of understanding what they are. They're there for very specific reasons. Again, it's about disease control. And really, that if you are using wooden pallets or other crates, boxes, etc., it's very important that they have been treated and that they are stamped with this particular stamp. Again, if you're having difficulty in sourcing compliance, or you can see that there are going to be problems down the road, good to share that with us in advance, because again, there's some chance we can do things in advance. It'll be very problematic if we have consignments turning up that are non-compliant. Just to move very quickly on to the requirements for export to the UK. On the 13th of July, the UK published their Border Operations Manual, and it indicates that there would be a phased approach to the requirements for export to the UK. Starting in January, there'll be a step up in April and a further step up in July. The initial iteration of the Border Operations Manual doesn't provide a lot of detail, and we are expecting some more detail in October. Just to let you know, we have constructed an IT system within the Department of Agriculture to enable the efficient provision of large numbers of certificates, because obviously this could result in very substantial numbers of certificates having to be issued. And we have constructed a system to provide for that. The important thing is, again, if you are exporting to the UK, come to the Department of Agriculture so we know about you. People who will require certification down the road will need to be registered with this new IT system. So it's really important. The earlier we know that you're out there, the better, and really would encourage you to get in contact with us through, again, the Brexit registration email address. Again, it is the responsibility of individual operators who will be sending products to the UK, or animals or plants. It will be your responsibility to comply with the requirements. So it's really important you know what they are. And if there's any lack of clarity, well, that's where we come in to try and bridge that gap and maybe help out. So those of you who already export products to other parts of the world will be very familiar with the challenges that poses, and it can take a bit of time. So the earlier people engage, the better. Just to say something very quickly about the Landbridge. So again, obviously, the challenge in relation to the Landbridge is to make sure that the goods that cross the Landbridge are European Union goods. So for that reason, they will have to be placed under customs transit procedure to ensure that there isn't substitution of the goods, that they are actually EU goods that arrived in the UK and left the UK and arrived in Ireland. There are regulations requiring certain controls to be carried out on animals and high-risk goods re-entering the Union. Just to say that there's still work ongoing in relation to the requirements, because obviously the departure of the UK has brought a huge emphasis on transit that wasn't really there before, because there aren't a lot of other situations where goods are transiting a non-EU country to go from one EU country to the next. There are very limited situations on the eastern border of the European Union where that happens. So really this is the first time this will be happening on a very substantial basis, and it's certainly presenting challenges in terms of the legislative requirements and the level of controls. So there is a technical amendment to the EU legislation that should make things easier, basically. The question is how other member states might decide to apply that, because it is a derogation, and we're engaging with member states in relation to that, and we'll be able to provide some further clarification as time goes on. We're also waiting clarity on what the UK, what controls they might apply to products crossing their territory from Ireland to continental Europe. They could have certain requirements, because obviously their concern would be that the products wouldn't, that people wouldn't avoid the import controls by using the transit procedures instead. So again, you know, we wait to hear in relation to that. The fact of the matter is, we've all seen the footage and the stories about Kent, etc. The reality is there is likely to be very substantial delays expected in transiting the UK. So really, if you want to remove the uncertainty, if you want to remove the potential for very long delays, it really is looking at switching now and really moving to direct movements from Ireland to continental Europe, because that will remove a whole load of uncertainty and a whole load of hassle, etc. on January 1st. In terms of you know, availability to do that today, we sometimes get questions about there's not huge availability today. Our point would be if the demand is there, business industry will step up and to supply that demand. So it is a question really of signalling to the shipping various shipping companies that there is that demand there, and then we have no doubt that they will they will put in place actions to meet that demand. That can't be done at short notice, so the sooner that's done, the better. So in summary, a few key points to take away. The operator responsible for the consignment, you need to know who that is today. They need to approach us and get registered. You need to make sure you're going to be able to get the certification, the particular commodity you're bringing in will be that you will be able to get it. You need to think about how the consignment will be presented at the BCP. We talked about a couple of ways in which efficiency can be improved. And then people need to get familiar with entering information in the various systems, be that the EU Traces system or be that the DAFM import system. And again, we're happy to facilitate people being able to do some trying out of those systems. We plan to provide some mock-up documentation that would allow people to get some experience in relation to that. Just very quickly, I just want to mention, so I've spoken about SBS controls in general, and DAFM has responsibility for the majority of those controls. But just to mention that the HSE is also responsible for carrying out import controls on foods of non-animal origin. In principle, the rules are pretty similar, that the person responsible, it's the same concept, that they need to contact the HSE so the HSE can make sure that they're registered on the various systems, and they have an email address also, importcontroldublin@hse.ie. The operator responsible for the consignment, again, it's the same principle. They need to submit documentation 24 hours in advance, and again, the email addresses are supplied there. Traces notification will be required for certain types of products, and again, more information on that can be supplied by the HSE. They have a general query webs email address, exports, that's in relation to exports, and then they have a general information available in terms of preparing for Brexit on the website. So again, you have all the information sources there. Again, it's important to know, is the commodity that you're bringing in, is it something that's subject to a DAFM check, or is it something that's subject to a HSE check, so you know who to speak to. So that's really important, again, in understanding what's the commodity, where does it fit. Just to make a comment in relation to another authority that is involved in controls on products imported from the UK, and this would be products for human consumption. That would be the Food Safety Authority of Ireland. So just to point out that they are also a player in this, and that there are controls, there are requirements that businesses will have to meet that aren't necessarily things that are checked at a border control post. And that's in relation to the food packaging. So in the European Union, there are set rules about what types of packaging can be used for food. And whilst the UK rules are aligned with that at the moment, they may not be in the future. I mean, this is one of the things the UK are fighting, is to be able to set their own rules going forward. So it's very important that businesses keep in contact with their suppliers and make sure their suppliers are providing goods that are in compliance with the European rules. Again, the FSA, I just want to make the same point as we've made. This is a really important point, actually. So there will be longer timeframes. So that does need to be taken into account in terms of cold chain and lengths of time and all of those kind of things. So not to forget about this. I mean, if there's an extra day added into something, that can have a very significant impact. So it's really doing that risk assessment now and assessing what needs to be done. The other thing to point out is the labelling requirements will change because it will no longer be an EU single market UK label. So there are some changes in relation to that. And again, in talking to your suppliers, you need to make sure the suppliers have put plans in place in relation to that. And then there are rules about rules of origin and labelling. So again, just to say, there's quite a lot to this. There could be changes in the labelling requirements, particularly in the future if the UK start to deviate from EU rules. So it's really important that you have some familiarity with them. Okay, just to say the FSAI have a whole load of resources. I can see I'm beginning to run out of time. So all I want to do is to thank you for listening. These are the DAFM sources of information. We have a Brexit call centre, we have a Brexit call email address, and we have a lot of information available on our Brexit website. Thank you very much.
That's great, Hazel. Thanks very much. So welcome back, everybody, to the final panel discussion where we will talk around some of the issues and address some of the queries that you've presented, posed in relation to Agri, moving Agri goods. So thanks, Hazel, and I know, in fairness, you've stepped in at the last minute, so thanks very much for that as well. It's definitely appreciated. And I'd like to welcome back Celine, who I think most people will have seen on a number of sessions earlier on today. So there's, I think, again, people have been eager in terms of posing some of the questions, so quite a number of the questions you have addressed within it. So I would ask maybe that if we have addressed them, if you have covered them in the presentation, I'm still happy to ask them, but I think the response can probably be short enough in terms of how we have addressed it. And Celine, there's a number of the kind of cross over the Landbridge transit, and there's a couple of Northern Ireland movements as well. Perfect. So absolutely happy that you might jump in on possibly some of those. Okay, look, we'll kick off with the first one. As the operator responsible for the consignment, what can I do to ensure SPS checks can be carried out more efficiently? And that probably brings it back to the how they present their goods. I think you would cover that, but if you'd like to pick up on that? Yeah, so I think two things. Just in making sure that they can get the certificates and that the certificates will be completed in an appropriate way. So really, that's the first thing. And then, as you said, Linda, we've also talked about how the consignments are presented. Now, that, again, is something that probably the supplier would deal with, how the consignments are presented. But the operator responsible for the consignment is the person who have the knowledge, and they can go and have a conversation. But the importer might also be the person to have that conversation. Main thing is the conversations happen. That consignment role, that operator, that seems to be a really critical role that people really need to connect with and understand who is that person going to be and the scope of what they need to do. Absolutely. Here's one is, if my business uses products that come from the UK, do I need to register? So I hope I'm interpreting this correctly, but the way I'm reading that, we're in an agri space, and that it's that the business is using some either plant and products of animal origin or of plant origin within their business, and on that basis, do they need to register? Now, you might correct me, Selena, I'm hearing that as I'm importing goods that I'm using within my own business.
From the customs perspective, obviously they will now become an importer. The session earlier on imports will be of interest to them, but obviously then who makes the customs declaration is a separate matter. But as the importer, you'll be responsible for providing the information required to submit the customs declaration. And just to say that the customs declaration is one piece, the requirements that Hazel can tell you about are a separate piece, and both need to be completed accurately and on time to ensure that the SPS controls can be done in a timely manner.
And I actually think that question is a really interesting one, because I think we have been focusing, when we use language around trading, and I think that there are a lot of people interpret trading as, well, I'm buying in goods for onward sale. And that's not necessarily the case. If you're buying goods that you use within your own business, that's an import. And maybe businesses that aren't exposed to customs before now may not be kind of seeing it that way. So that would be a great takeaway if there are businesses on foot of that question using products within the business. That's it, you're importing, you're trading. That one's great. If the agent, I might say something about the registration, because again, it's really quite a complicated issue. So just so people understand it, customs control and SPS controls are two different animals, so to speak. So I like to think of it as a two-story house. So the customs control, the customs formalities are the first story,
and the SBS controls are built on top of that. So registration from an SBS point of view is much more complicated. Actually, I'd love to be in operation customs rules, because at least they're the same for every commodity, basically. But the complexity for SBS is they're different for every commodity. So therefore, registration is a bit of a complicated concept. The operators responsible for the consignment do have to be registered, and are most of them are probably not registered with us today, so it's really important that they get registered. Whether the importer themselves, the business using the meat or the vegetables or whatever that are coming from the UK, whether they need to be registered, it'll depend on what their status is today. So what I would say is Brexit registration, contact us at Brexit registration. Even if you think you're already registered, we can then verify that and come back to you in relation to it.
Okay, that's helpful. If the agent is completing the CHED, do they also need to register and update traces? If the agent is completing the CHED.
Yeah, so again, in that case, there's quite a bit of different terminology being used at the moment. So we're now settling on using this concept of operator responsible for the consignment. So that can be a customs agent, could be somebody within the company themselves. Or it could be, a business could decide that they have one person doing the customs piece, another person doing the SBS piece. I mean, there's a whole variety of ways that could be done. So the operator responsible for the consignment is the person who will complete the common health entry document. And without that being completed, the process can't even begin. They will also be the person then who will submit the documentation in advance into our system, which will facilitate us doing some checks in advance, and therefore being able to green route consignments through the ports. So that is it has to be the same individual that's on the traces or has filled out the CHED, so that actually we can link those two things.
Thank you. If I have consignments from multiple customers on my truck, can I rely on a single health certificate?
Well, even before Hazel answers that one, just to say, as I think how you described it was really perfect, actually, the two-storey house. The foundation even, if we want to get into more levels, is that there's a customs declaration required, but that is as well, you need separate declarations for each different consignee. So regardless of the SBS requirements, even if it was normal goods that don't require any of the additional certification that Hazel has discussed, if they're going to different consignees, you need separate declarations. And this is where the complexity around groupage load and mixed loads really gets, into the nitty-gritty of things. So even from a customs perspective, you may need multiple declarations in that scenario.
And I think if there's businesses tuning in, picking up on that point, if they weren't in on the importers sessions earlier on, where we're talking about having the individual declarations, putting them all in the pre-boarding notification. If that question concerns you, you need to see, if you haven't already seen it, you'll need to tune into the import module from earlier on today. I import
so sorry, just to add then on the SBS bit on top of that, because actually they're quite matched in some ways. So again, the requirements in the EU legislation are very clear. There has to be a health certificate and CHED per consignment, and a consignment can only be of one type of commodity. So, for example, if you're a retailer with a variety of different commodities, each will require a separate health certificate and a separate common health entry document as the EU rules stand.
So I think really what you'll end up with a situation there is, from a customs perspective, a consignment can contain multiple different product types. But if you do have multiple different product types, you'll need multiple different CHEDs. Is that correct?
Exactly.
So, and then all of that needs to go in to your PBN. So you could have multiple declarations per each individual consignment within the load.
This last question that we've just discussed reminds me, there was feedback which is totally understandable, and we did reference it a number of times during the earlier customs one, and we can do nothing but apologise the level of acronyms. So again, I think we do forget that, but exactly. there was comments during the presentation. I don't know if agriculture have a glossary of terms or something, but there was some feedback. People struggled a little, I think, to keep up with some of the acronyms. But yeah, I have to apologise for that. All of us are guilty of that. So I don't know if there's a glossary. Maybe people can go onto the DAFM Brexit site and they'll be able to get further information for the elements that they're interested in anyway.
Yeah, no, it's something we can take away. I don't think we have a glossary at the moment, Linda, but I think it is something we can take away. But just before we leave that piece, I think a key message comes out of it, which is the more consignments you have on your truck, the more complicated it would be. And really, there's an answer to that. So when we talk about how you can improve efficiency in moving through the port, the less consignments there are on a truck. And obviously, that would require quite a bit of re-engineering, but it's definitely something worth considering, I think, at this point in time.
Does DAFM keep the health certificate, the original health certificate, after the product has been cleared?
Yeah. So that's a legal requirement that we hold on to the original certificate. What we do provide is, in a normal situation, a non-COVID situation, we would provide an endorsed copy of the health certificate for that to be taken to the premises destination. From January 1st, people will be able to get access to those health certificates through our electronic system as well. So,
if people have fruit and products of animal origin on the same load, can they put all of the products on the one shed, or is it two separate, one for the plants and one for the POA? Yeah, so there's a complexity there as well, because there are different types of sheds. You picked it up, Linda. So there's one particular type of shed for live animals, there's another particular type of shed for products of animal origin, there's a third type of shed for products of plant origin, and then there's a fourth type for products that, these would tend to be the products checked by the HSE. They have just an increased risk associated with them. So it is that, as I said, the more consignments you have on the truck, the bigger the variety of commodities, the more complexity. So again, I think it's about simplify, simplify, simplify. Yeah, okay. Regarding clerical error on the documents, is an official letter from a competent authority sufficient, or do original documents have to be reissued?
So again, that depends on what the error actually is. So there are situations, and they're provided for in EU legislation. So it goes back to the point I made. Our hands are tied by the EU legislation. We don't have a lot of discretion, because obviously the EU wants to make sure that all member states apply the same rules. So there are certain situations where a replacement certificate can be provided, but they tend to be very minor clerical errors. As you saw from my slide earlier, quite a percentage of the rejections are based on documentary problems. So sometimes people are inclined to call them administrative errors. They're not administrative errors, because they actually can be quite significant things, and then a doubt about the authenticity of the consignment. So there are some situations, and we can provide clarity in relation to that. But I think the key message is to engage with the suppliers now to make sure those kind of errors don't happen. And it'd be a plan for us to put together, maybe some information on the kind of errors we see, and to make that available so people can check. Okay, that's the kind of thing that can go wrong. And that's why we want to engage with the operators responsible for the consignment, to tell them the kind of things that can go wrong, because lots of things can go wrong. And if people are aware of that, at least they can put systems in place to try and prevent that, and all of that will help with the efficiency.
And if businesses have specific queries, they can use the context that you had on your last slide. There's a number of questions around seals, so I might just pick two elements of it. One, does every truck need to be sealed? And I know you did cover this. And the other one is, what will happen if the seal on my truck is broken in the UK?
And I might, again, first layer.
Yeah, you do the foundation, I'll build on it.
So when we talk about seals, there's multiple types of seals that we're talking about. Particularly if goods are moving under transit, there is a requirement for goods to be sealed unless the consignments can be easily identified. So what I would say in relation to transit seals is transit seals are not always required, but where one has been affixed to a load, that is something we would check to make sure that it's still intact. And if it's not intact, we will need a reasonable explanation of why it has been broken. If that was, say, by the customs authorities in the UK, then they would affix their seal, and the documentation would be updated to reflect that that has happened, and that would allow us to verify with them if we had any doubts. The other seals, I think I'll let Hazel build on top of that, but we wouldn't envisage all of the transit movements being sealed at all.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so a little bit similar. There's not always a legal requirement to apply a seal to a consignment coming to a border control post. In fact, it's in limited circumstances there's a legal obligation, but I think the point that we want to get across to people, if you have a seal, on the truck, and as I said in the presentation, and it's been applied by an official and it's on the health certificate, that will really speed up consignments that only are required to have a documentary and identity check. So we'd really encourage people to do it. From time to time, seals do get broken. Obviously, sometimes there are enforcement reasons. Customs authorities in the UK and in Ireland sometimes have to do that. And we will be in we'll be in touch with our UK colleagues about that. In that situation, what we would ask for is whoever broke the seal, whatever authority, they'd put a new seal on and just a certificate to say they broke the seal, and that would provide sufficient coverage. Now, obviously, if the seal is broken by somebody else, that's really problematic because it's basically then an unsealed consignment, and it will then be subjected to a full identity, or it'll have to be subjected to a full identity check when it arrives.
Okay, and I think that there's loads of questions, and I think we've said that on every of the sessions. It has been great to see the level of the volume of participation and the level of engagement. So again, thank you everybody for doing that. But just as a final question, if I'm importing goods and moving them across Landbridge, will that be subject to SBS checks?
If those goods are coming from continental Europe?
Yes.
Yeah. So they won't be, well, again, it is commodity specific, and this is why, as I said, I wish we had the customs rules. So if it's a product of plant origin, or it's a plant or plant origin, it won't be required to be subjected to checks. If it's live animals, they are subjected to checks. If it's products of animal origin, depending on the type of commodity, they'll all have some level of check, and depending on the type of commodity, it might be a more detailed check.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much, and thank you everybody who has lasted with us for the day. And it's been a long day. There's been an enormous amount of information that has been given across. I think over those 8 sessions that we've covered today, we've a further 10 technical sessions tomorrow. So again, please tune in. There's quite a number that it was clear that overlapped with from the sessions today: origin, classification, valuation, comprehensive guarantee. There's really they're just ones that jump off the top of my head now from the impact that they have on importing or exporting, no matter what the product is. So I would encourage you, and registration is still open for that. So please do join us tomorrow. I'd like to thank you, Celine, and Hazel, thank you again, and absolutely acknowledging the stepping in at the last minute. Very much appreciated. No problem. So the sessions will be up on the Revenue website. I think today's sessions will be up tomorrow, and we'll be giving the agriculture sessions and the Department of Business and Enterprise session to those departments, and they'll be up on the website as well. They'll be on ours as well, but we'll make them directly available from the other departments. So thank you all, everybody, very much, and we'll see you at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning for all those coming back. Thanks very much.
Thank you.